I am here today to tell you about the future of computing. And this is what we in the trade know as a fool's errand. Predicting the future at all is crazy. Predicting the future of computing is pretty crazy. But it is a little bit easier at certain historical periods than it is at others. And it's actually fairly easy right now. And there are two secrets that if you know them, it will help you predict the future. And I'm going to share them with you, and then you too could be a futurist. The first secret is this. Change does not happen uniformly. It's not like this thing, then this thing, one step at a time. It's very chunky. Evolutionary biologists talk about punctuated equilibrium. Technology people talk about paradigm shifts and disruptive technologies. And what's being described by all of these terms is the fact that an idea gets created. Somebody thinks of something like the idea of the telegraph, the idea of using electricity for communications. And at first, it seems like a sort of a cute stunt, and it takes a long time for people to realize how deep.
Sorry, that's me.
To realize how deeply important certain ideas are. The transistor, oh boy, we could make little radios for our pocket, but of course the transistor led to everything that's happened since. And the point is, it takes a long time between when the real disruptive idea happens till it starts to become obvious. And the reason for that is the second secret. All growth is exponential. If any of you have read the works of Raymond Kurzweil, he explains this very well. People are terrible at perceiving exponential growth in the early stages. They, for a long time, perfect. For a long time, everybody thinks, no big deal. And that's what this is about. I don't know how many of you were paying attention at the time, but almost certainly one of your high school math teachers told you the story of the king and the mathematician and the chessboard. How many remember it? Oh, come on. You all slept through Algebra 1? Okay. Then we'll have to start from scratch. So the king's mathematician performs some service, and the king is grateful. So he says, mathematician, you can have anything that you want. What's your wish? And the mathematician says, sire, my wish is very modest. All I want you to do is take this chessboard, and I want you to put 1 grain of rice on the first square, 2 grains on the second, 4 grains on the third, and so on until the chessboard is full. And the king laughs, of course, a trifle. But just for his own amusement, he agrees to do it. So, first we look like this. Now, you look at that, anyone who has taken Algebra 1 has all of the information they need to know what's going to happen. You could just do the math and you know something big is going to happen. But your gut doesn't believe it, right? This is no big deal. Looks linear, right? So then we keep going. And when you get about this stage, oh, wow, this, whatever it is we're talking about, maybe is worthy of paying attention to. But we're still only on the second course of the chessboard. Yeah, the fact is that there aren't enough grains of rice in the universe to meet the mathematician's wish. And this is something that none of us are good at thinking about. Exponential growth is a big, big deal. So speaking of rice, my co-author, Mickey McManus, a few of you may know him, he is, let us say, one who's not ashamed to stretch a fact once in a while in order to make a point. So when we were writing Trillions, Mick comes in one morning and with a few paragraphs that he wrote, and he says, what he wrote was, we now make more transistors than we make grains of rice, and we make them cheaper. Oh, that's a good line, and that would be something that would be fun to add to the book. But sounded to me like something that needed a little fact-checking, right? So I poked around a little bit, and I found this slide from the Semiconductor Industry Association. Not only is Mick's claim not an exaggeration, it significantly understates the reality. By 2015, the world will have more than 1,000 quintillion transistors. Okay? That's 250 times more than all the grains of rice consumed in the world. And for the price of a single grain of rice, a retail shopper can buy 125,000 transistors. Okay, that's where we are right now today. Now, you know, I mean, that sounds crazy, but, you know, in your little grab bag this morning, you were all given like 1 billion transistors, right? That's because that's how that little thumb drive is made. But 1,000 quintillion transistors, right? And you know, we're still filling the squares of the chessboard. So the message of Trillions is scale matters. It really does, and it matters in a big way in the long run. So let's talk about computers instead of grains of rice. I want to start with a little 1-minute snippet from a video we made to accompany Trillions.
If you looked at computing in 1900, it was a career. A person who tabulated numbers was called a computer. Fast forward to World War II. We're creating massive, building-size electronic computers. Our goal was to break ciphers like Enigma, to figure out enemy activities, to save the world from the Nazis. In that era, there were very few electronic computers. This was just a small hill. It was really computing as 4 or 5 big calculators. Fast forward to the late 60s and all the way up to today. That's this mountain that we're on right now, and it's big. It started with this idea that you could look into a computer screen and see a place. You had a desktop and some folders and a trash can, and the information was actually in the computer. Today, at the top of this mountain, we have just passed 1 billion internet users. But there's a much bigger mountain ahead. The future isn't going to be billions, but trillions of computers embedded in just about everything. So how big is a trillion? Well, let's count back in seconds. Go back 1 million seconds. That's like maybe a week and a half ago. Go back 1 billion seconds. Well, that brings us back to the mid-1970s. All right, now go back 1 trillion seconds. How far back do you think that is? Well, you know, it turns out that it's over 30,000 years ago. So trillions of computers. This is not computing as a place or computing as a big calculator. It's going to be computing as an ecology. It's all around us, not information in the computers, but people in the information.
So people in the information. Let's talk about that a little bit. The biggest thing that's going to distinguish computing in the future from computing in the past is sheer scale, both in number of machines and the amount of information. We make 10 billion microprocessors every year, right? So that's right now we're manufacturing a microprocessor, more than 1 microprocessor for every man, woman, and child on the planet. We've literally permeated the world with computation. It's kind of like we've supersaturated the world. You know, supersaturation is like if you very carefully mix salt or sugar in a solution, you can actually, if you're careful enough, you can get more dissolved material than the water can really hold, but it's not stable. As soon as you drop some kind of seed into it, it all of a sudden crystallizes. And that's where we are now with computers. It's a super saturation. We put computers everywhere, and we're about to drop the seed. And the seed is connectivity. So let me talk about that. Of those 10 billion processors we make every year, most of them are standalone right now, but there are 4 billion connected devices. Most of them are cell phones, but of course PCs and everything with Wi-Fi counts as well. But still, 4 billion is a tiny number compared to the to the number of all the machines in the world. So the question is this: in the future, what percentage of newly manufactured computers will be connected, that is, be able to talk to each other? Okay, here's my prediction. All of them. Now, why would I say that? Let me give you just one example of what's going on in the industry. About a year ago, Intel announced a project called Radio Free Intel. And it had 2 parts. First part is Rose Point, which is a project to make a complete system on a chip, a single chip computer that includes Wi-Fi, okay? Now, you can get Wi-Fi on a chip now, but it's a separate chip that's kind of over on the side, and therefore you have to pay extra money to include it in something. But if Wi-Fi were on the single chip computer, on the processor that you're using routinely for everything, the radio comes for free. The second part of Radio Free Intel is what they call Moore's Law radio. Y'all know what Moore's Law is, right? It's, the thing about computing power doubling every 18 months. Moore's Law radio is a 100% digital implementation of Wi-Fi, okay? Now, you might think we have that already, but we don't. As I said, we have chips that implement Wi-Fi on one chip, but those chips have analog components. They have, capacitors and inductors and things like that. And the problem with analog components is they don't scale. They don't scale downward. If you cut the size of a transistor in half, which is a digital component, it's still a transistor. It does exactly the same thing it does before. If you cut the size of a capacitor in half, it's a different capacitor. So you can't, so analog components don't follow this Moore's Law curve. They don't get cheaper, faster, smaller every year the way digital components do. But if you can make 100% digital radio, it hops on the Moore's Law bandwagon, and all the magic that goes with that and that exponential curve all of a sudden starts happening. So the point is, because of Radio Free Intel and 1,000 other projects that are going on just like it, every processor made in a year or two is going to just routinely have a radio. It's going to have the ability at no marginal cost to communicate with every other machine in the world. This is a big deal. So we're not going to just have 1 trillion disconnected computers. We're going to have 1 trillion node network. What would such a world look like? And the answer is, it would look a lot like nature. Billions of people, trillions of computers, unbounded numbers of information devices, all constantly interacting in ways that are just going to be far too complex to design or even understand. The term Internet of Things doesn't begin to explain it, to describe it rather. The only word that fits is ecology. User experience in this world, what it's going to be like to use computing in this world, is going to be an emergent property of ecology. The information isn't going to be in the machines. It's going to make far more sense to talk about the machines and the people being in the information. To tell you a little bit more about what I mean by that, you could identifies sort of three phases of the interaction between people and computers. This was phase one, right, in the 1950s. The computer is giant calculator. Computer, you would put information in, it would go through the computer, and an answer would come out. And of course, you'd put the information in this form, right, all punch cards. Anybody but me ever used a punch card? That's not a few people. So this was what human-computer interaction was like back then, right? You sit in the key punch machine, type the cards, then you would hand them over to the wizard who ran the computer. That, by the way, is 5 megabytes of data. Okay, that's like one mediocre bitmap image. We did have graphics, though. Okay, so that was phase one. The information went through the computer to be processed. Phase two, the information is in the computer. The Macintosh and a little later Windows made us realize that we could actually keep our data inside these little boxes. We didn't just have to like run them through and keep them on the punch cards. And at first people used them as just sort of typewriters that didn't need paper. But you know, pretty soon spreadsheets came, and images, and music, and finally video. And then the internet came around, and you realized, well, we have all this information in this box. We could create networks, and we could move stuff from one box to another, and you know, all of a sudden we had the World Wide Web. But we're right in the middle of yet another fundamental change. It's machines and people in the information, right? It's real soon going to be the case that you're not going to think of using the computer to get the information. The computer is going to recede into the background. Yeah, I mean, even now, email isn't something in your PC the way it was before, right? Yeah, it's something that's floating around in the air, and you just pluck it out with your phone or any convenient device. Everything is going to be like that real soon. So modern computing devices are best thought of as simply windows into cyberspace, prosthetic devices that let us see data that would otherwise be invisible. And the thing about this is the best windows are invisible, right? So the computers just go away. Now, this is Google Glass. I'm not making a prediction one way or another about whether Google Glass is going to succeed or fail as a product. But it's certainly the right idea, right? You put these on, you forget they're there, and you start seeing data objects floating around in space. So I found this on the internet. Remember Paperclip guy? From Windows, he'd pop up at the most annoying times and get in your way. Well, this is going to be even a worse idea in the future than it was in the past, because the windows should be invisible. The last thing you want is annoying computer interaction getting between you and your data stuff that you care about. And so it's going to take a new kind of design, a new way of thinking in order to pull this off well. This is a Venn diagram we've used at Maya almost from the beginning to describe how we approach design. It's interdisciplinary from three perspectives: visual design, engineering, and human sciences. Now, what's interesting about this Venn diagram is that each of them corresponds to an aspect of the problem. Right? The visual designers deal with information, the engineers deal with machines, and the human scientists deal with people. So each of these, there's the space between them defines a professional discipline. The space between the machines and the information is what computer programmers do. The space between the machines and the people are what human-computer interaction is about. It's what the psychologists and the human factors people do. But this third space between people and information isn't talked about as much: human information interaction. And once the machines start becoming invisible and literally fading into the woodwork, it's this human information interaction which is going to take central stage. And this is, the behaviors in this world, as I said, are going to become emergent properties of how we choose to assemble vast quantities of stuff, some of which are made of transistors, but most of which is just pure information. So if I had more time, I could give like a long litany of fascinating, like concrete examples of what's going on, in real life right now. But I only have time for one, so I picked this as my favorite. These are digital drugs. Okay, and by the way, this is not pie in the sky. What I'm describing is FDA-approved drugs. Okay, these are available now. The way they work is a little processor in each pill. It's powered by the acid in your stomach. You swallow the pill, the acid in your stomach generates electricity. The pills then communicate with a little skin patch, which passes on the information to your iPhone, and from there to a physician, maybe to you if it's your elderly parents or grandparents that need to be monitored for their drug regimens. Okay, so this to me epitomizes the future. Small, cheap, numerous, local communications, and non-obvious. Okay, and again, this is just one example. There's so much stuff like this going on. It just makes your head spin. And again, not pie in the sky, FDA approved. So, to wrap up here, Peggy asked me to sort of add a little bit to the trillion story that would represent some advice for the nonprofit sector. And I will do so, but you're not going to like it. My advice is this: start looking gift horses in the mouth. Okay, how many of you use Dropbox or Google Calendar? You're using the free versions mostly, right? Well, there's a real moral hazard here. The industry that is represented by these so-called cloud services is really not the beginning of the pervasive computing story which I've just described. It's a desperate attempt to pretend to be in that world, but to hold on as long as possible to the old paradigms. And of course, that's the way industry always works. But it's rarely a good idea. All these clouds, cloud computing that everybody's talking about. Here's the dirty secret: they're not clouds at all. They are zeppelins, painted to look like clouds, and they're full of hydrogen. Okay. A day does not go by when there isn't another story about how these things are hacked, right? Not only are they, everything that I just said, but the backs of them have huge targets painted on them for hackers to attack. For you to be passing your data on to these services thoughtlessly, now I'm not saying not to do it, I'm saying don't do it thoughtlessly, is a big mistake. So if you use these services, ask yourself the following question. The information that I'm storing there, would it be okay if those information were posted on the home page of my organization's website for all to see? If the answer is yes, and often it is, the schedule for this conference is not a secret, right? It probably was on the Federal Center's website. It's fine, use Google Calendar. But if the answer is no, if one of your clients would sue you should it get out, or there's some business reason that this information is sensitive, stay away from the free stuff. There are exceptions, but what I'm saying is be very, very careful. not only is all that stuff being mined, because of course nothing is free, these people have business models too, it's also almost certain to be hacked. And you just have to assume that if you're doing this, you're making the information public. I know that is difficult advice to follow because I know what the budgets of most nonprofits are like. But the bottom line is this: the only safety in the age of trillions, if the information is going to escape from the machines and basically be floating around in the real cloud, the only safety is in encryption, right? That's how we're going to build a safe world. And the rule of thumb, if you really want to be safe, never let any information that you consider private leave your physical possession unless it's encrypted and you have the decryption keys. Okay? And none of these free services will meet that criterion. The pay services do. There is a free Google Docs, and there's Google Docs for Business. Google Docs for Business you pay for. And the difference between them is the free Google Docs are open, unencrypted, and subject to data mining. But if you pay Google, they will be glad to arrange the encryption to do it in a way that meets the criterion that you want. And, we could get into all the other services. There are some interesting things going on. There's this thing called, did I put it in the slide? No, I didn't. Sorry. There's a thing called BitTorrent Sync, which is very interesting. BitTorrent is one of these companies that started out in the music stealing business, right? The stuff, the peer-to-peer data transfer networks, where they've kind of gone legitimate. And there's this free application you could download. And the way it works, it's just like Dropbox, except you and I, and any group that wants to share data, will share an encryption key, and then fully encrypted end-to-end, no central server, no cloud service involved, although certainly the cloud is involved because it's, the real cloud is the internet. We can share information in complete safety. The BitTorrent people had no access to the data. They couldn't answer a subpoena, if they were asked to. And that is a harbinger. That's an early example of the kinds of services that are going to make sense in the future. There aren't very many of them yet. The free stuff is very tempting, but my advice is be very, very careful and simply assume that anything that you give away unencrypted is going to be stolen. So on that bright note, thank you.